Tiny house considerations is back. If you're getting serious about tiny house living, then I'd like to invite you to join me and my co-teacher, Lynna Menard, in an 8-week online course where you will delve into planning your tiny house from the trailer or foundation all the way up to the roof and everything in between, with a small group of students and me and Lynna as your guides. This is the most comprehensive training that I offer for planning and building a tiny house, and students are really loving it. You can learn more about tiny house considerations at thetinyhouse.net/THC. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/THC, which stands for Tiny House Considerations. Class starts on October 5th, and we meet every Thursday for 8 weeks. By the end of the course, you will have filled out your tiny house decisions workbook, picked your appliances, developed a budget, and potentially even started laying out your tiny house. You can learn more at thetinyhouse.net/THC. To learn more and join us for the fall 2022 edition of Tiny House Considerations. I hope to see you in class.
It just freezes. There's nothing we can do about it. So we do have some times where we can't use our running water.
Oh, wow. And do you have like a backup system when that happens?
No, we don't. We don't.
All right.
Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and this is episode 232 with Megan Lockhart. Megan lives tiny with her partner, 2 kids, and 2 dogs in Golden, British Columbia. And this is just a really great conversation, a really great real conversation about what it's like living tiny, the pros and the cons, the trials and the tribulations, and also the immense benefits that Megan feels that she and her family get from this lifestyle. Megan is very honest. She doesn't try to hide the things that are struggles for her and her family. And she also is great about advocating for the benefits of tiny living. I hope you stick around and listen to this conversation with Megan Lockhart. And if you stick around until after the credits, there's a bonus session with Megan where she shares her builder actually forgot to put the furnace in her tiny house and how that wreaked havoc the first winter and what she's going to do about it. I was happy that Megan was willing to be so honest and share the challenges that she had working with her tiny house builder. I hope you stick around. Tiny House Considerations is back. If you're getting serious about tiny house living, then I'd like to invite you to join me and my co-teacher, Lynna Menard, in an 8-week online course where you will delve into planning your tiny house from the trailer or foundation all the way up to the roof and everything in between, with a small group of students and me and Lynna as your guide. This is the most comprehensive training that I offer for planning and building a tiny house, and students are really loving it. You can learn more about tiny house considerations at thetinyhouse.net/THC. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/THC, which stands for Tiny House Considerations. Class starts on October 5th, and we meet every Thursday for 8 weeks. By the end of the course, you will have filled out your tiny house decisions workbook, picked your appliances, developed a budget, and potentially even started laying out your tiny house. You can learn more at thetinyhouse.net/THC. To learn more and join us for the fall 2022 edition of Tiny House Considerations. Hope to see you in class. All right, I am here with Megan Lockhart. Inspired by her belief that living tiny doesn't have to mean living small, Megan sold everything in 2021 and now resides in a tiny home with her partner Neil, 11-year-old daughter, 8-year-old son, and 2 dogs. She lives a much simpler life and runs her business full-time from the side of a mountain. She lives on 40 acres in Golden, British Columbia. She has been featured on shows like The Insider, Go Solo, Dwell, and Tiny House Ideas, among others.
Megan is passionate about showing others that they can make huge changes, including leaving the expectations of mainstream suburban life. Megan Lockhart, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I'm excited to chat. Your tiny home is beautiful, by the way. I've been kind of oogling pictures, and I was curious if you could kind of tell the extended story of how you ended up in a tiny house.
Okay, I have a really honest and a little bit of a wild story, but I'm going to share it with you.
Let's do it.
So, I bought the tiny house in 2019 during
Mhm.
the great pandemic and was going to move out here to homeschool the kids, but quickly realized I didn't have running water, I didn't have electricity, and living
Mhm.
here with the kids and not owning a pickup truck or anything would be really hard. So I decided to Airbnb the tiny house, rent in the city, and then kind of got old fast. And I was like, we have a much simpler life in the tiny house. So we dove right in full time in January, so the middle of winter, which was a wild ride. But that's how we ended up here full time.
Mhm. Wow. And so how long did you Airbnb it, and was that, was it working out for you, or was that part of the decision why you wanted to come back to it?
Yeah, so we had Airbnb'd it for almost 18 months and it was super successful.
Mhm.
People loved the experience.
Yeah.
They loved disconnecting. They loved coming out to the mountains and working. We had fantastic
Mhm.
reviews. We became a super host. It was magical and I can't wait to own another one.
Nice.
But we there were some other little pieces. I was going through a divorce.
Mhm.
The economy was doing really, really well in Calgary where we were living, and our landlord
Mhm.
wanted to sell the house and basically said,
Mhm.
"It's time for you to get out of the house that you're renting." So,
Oh boy.
in this really yeah, it was wild, but in this really beautiful, chaotic mess, I looked at it, I looked at my partner and said, "We wanna be out there anyways. Whoever we believe in is pushing us to go there now." So, that was
Mm.
also the pushing factor to get us into the tiny, and it never feels small. We aren't Airbnb-ing it anymore. Obviously, we're living in it full time, but it was really, really successful. I would do it again in a heartbeat for sure.
Nice. Can you give us, since podcasts are not visual, can you kind of describe your tiny house and maybe talk about some of the specs, like the length, the width, that kind of stuff?
For sure. Yeah, it's big. It's 41 feet,
Dang.
which is 416 square feet. The kids, so you walk in, there's a living room. Above the living room, there's a loft for my
Mhm.
daughter. And then there's a
Mhm.
kitchen space, which flows into a dining room. And then I have my ensuite bathroom, which I love, which is hilarious in a tiny home.
Nice.
That goes right into the master bedroom. And the master bedroom has a full queen size bed in it. And then above the bathroom is my son's loft. So there's two lofts
Mhm.
and then a area for a master bedroom. So there's lots of privacy in here.
Yeah. So there's multiple bedrooms, multiple bathrooms, even.
One bathroom, but
Oh,
I
one
call it
bathroom. Okay.
I call it the ensuite because you walk, it's like connected to the master bedroom, and everybody kind of thinks
Okay.
that's the most ridiculous thing. Just one bathroom. Two bathrooms would be wild in a tiny house.
It would be wild. And in terms of your utilities, are you still off grid where you are?
So, no, we're not off grid anymore. We are off grid water, which
Mhm.
is super fun, and I love it because we're very aware of our water consumption. But we do have
Yep.
electricity now, and the electricity is a blessing because when it's hot here,
Yeah.
it gets super hot, and it's nice to have the lights and not rely on the solar grid. We do have solar panels too, but for the water, we haul our water in and we put 1,000 liters under the tiny and we pump
Wow.
it in through the tiny. So everything is, we go through about 1,000 liters of water a week, which might
Mhm.
sound like a lot for some people, but we're a family of four. That includes laundry, showers, dishwasher, which were spoiled, but all the good things.
And, 1,000, it sounds like a big number, but for those Imperial fans, well, not fans, but those who are used to Imperial, that's about 264 gallons. So not a terrible amount of water for a large number of, for a family. How do you haul the water in? Can you talk about like, how does that work?
So it's kind of a cool story. I think it's a cool story. When we first got the tiny, we had to go to a creek and fill a
Mhm.
tank of water on the pickup truck.
Wow.
But now the city actually, or the town, is redeveloping the highway. So they gave us access to free water, which is fantastic. Because they
Wow.
took away our creek. They had to take away the creek to redo the highway. So we get free
Mhm.
town water. We still have to go to town. They have like a pump system where we fill the tank and then we drain the tank into the tank that's under
Mhm.
the tiny house. And I actually posted some videos on Instagram because so many people were asking about it. And I'm like, I have to film this
Nice.
process. And in the middle of winter, the process sucks. It's terrible.
Yep.
It's cold. We're out there holding the hose to drain it in, but it makes you really appreciate every little bit of water that you do use. So
Now, how do you keep that water under the tiny house from freezing in the winter?
that is a fantastic question because we didn't for the first little while. We were brand new to the whole experience, which is part of why I love living tiny as well, because you learn so many things every day, every week, like
Mhm.
almost every hour, there's something to learn about it. But we, the first few weeks that we were here, we didn't have the front of the tiny skirted or insulated. We just kind of thought it should be fine and quickly realized everything freezes. Like the water freezes when it hits a certain temperature, which sounds ridiculous, but it's, science.
Yeah.
So we now have it insulated and we have a door that lifts up so we can get the hose and drain the water in there. And then
Okay.
we have a heater and a thermostat inside the area that the water's living in. And as soon as the inside of that area turns a certain temperature, the heater pumps on and warms up
Okay.
that little tiny space. And it's been a lifesaver. However,
Yeah.
even with that heating system, there are some times when if we're in a few weeks of cold weather, it just freezes. There's nothing we can do about it. So we
Mm.
do have some times where we can't use our running water.
Oh, wow. And do you have like a backup system when that happens?
No, we don't. We don't.
All right.
Um, it just is what it is.
Yep.
We get our drinking water from town as well. Like we just
Mhm.
have
Mhm.
bottles. But no, there's a few days after skiing or after doing things where you come back and you're like, unfortunately, children, we can't have showers today.
Yep. Too cold. Are there improvements to that system that you think could like make the difference?
Yeah, we're in September right now, and it is starting to get a little bit chillier in the evenings.
Yeah.
So we have gotten heated cables to wrap around things. We
Yep.
also skirted the rest of the tiny, so it didn't
Mhm.
have a bottom. And now that we're here full time, we spent the last few weeks putting insulation and everything. So I'm hoping this winter will be smoother because it was pretty crappy sometimes last winter, but it'll be okay.
Yeah, I hope so for your sake, but I'll bet the heat tape will make a big difference.
Yeah. And it was interesting because I'm new to the tiny space and the tiny world. And
Mhm.
when I purchased the tiny home, I didn't even think of asking those questions. I didn't think of asking like, how will it do in the winter? What do I do with the water? How do I skirt this? What is it going to cost me
Yeah.
to do those things? None of those questions came up for me.
And so do you feel like you got lucky, or do you feel like you got the short straw?
I think I got a learning experience.
Okay.
So I think that I like to, when people are part of the communities and asking questions about tiny in the winter, it's very different in Canada than it is in
Mm-hmm.
areas of the States that don't have freezing cold winter or long
Yeah.
extended winters. And I think that for home builders and for consumers and buyers of tiny homes, we should have some education about these things. Like we should say, hey, here's the climate I live in. What questions should I ask? Right? And what kind of heating sources should I put inside the tiny, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those are things that you don't usually ask those questions of a normal builder, but in a tiny house, it really makes a difference. And that's actually a good question. Like, how do you heat the tiny house?
Yeah, so we have a mini split that heats the tiny, but because our tiny is
Uh-huh.
so big, the mini split doesn't reach the whole house. And then we
Mm-hmm.
also have electric heat, and
Okay.
that's in the master room, and it does get pretty toasty in here. And then the mini split is also, so it's heat and air conditioning. So that is
Right.
how we heat it. I would, now that we're here, I would have loved to put a fireplace, like a wood burning fireplace,
Yeah.
but that's not in the plan. So
Yeah. It's a nice aesthetic for sure. Um, it's tough in a tiny house though to have a wood stove just from the where you store the wood and how much wood you can store inside and just the mess of all that and
mhm.
keeping them going. It's a lot.
Yeah, and it sounds beautiful. It's like very
Yeah.
pretty, but you're right. Right now with the two dogs, the front of the house, oh my gosh, it gets so messy. It's always messy.
Yeah. Yeah. But it cleans up fast, right?
12 minutes.
That's awesome. So have you done like a video on 12-minute tiny house cleanup?
No, I haven't yet because
Okay.
it's also funny. I was listening to some of your other previous shows, and it is true. People always have these beautiful pictures of what their tiny homes look like on social media. But the
Yeah.
reality is they get really messy fast. They also clean up really fast, but you're trying to always find things for like spots for things. Like where should we put the winter jackets? Where should we store the dog's food? So no videos.
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of those storage solutions, is it the kind of thing that like you kind of set it and forget it, or is it like a process like that you're always kind of maybe adding new things, taking away old things, and figuring out how they all fit?
It's 100% a process and it's always evolving. I
Hmm.
find like blankets and food and baking items and dog things and kids things and seasonal items. I'm always changing this tiny house, always. And it is a little bit fun
Yeah.
because you discover what works and what doesn't. And then when it finally works, something else has to come into the tiny and needs to be changed. So and then you kinda I wanted the tiny to have one spot for every single item, and that's just not the reality because the seasons change and your kids change and the dogs change and you have to move things, so
Yeah.
always evolving.
Do you do you have any kind of offsite storage for those off-season items?
Yeah, we do. We didn't before. We kind of
Hmm.
had enough room when we just were Airbnb-ing the place, but
Yeah.
this we did finish a shed. And it's been a lifesaver because we do have the
Yeah.
storage bins that keep, our winter jackets and our luggage and, things that you're not using day to day.
Hmm.
And then we also have a like a carport outside. Obviously, it's not inside. um, it's outside, but it houses our skis, some of the equipment that we need around here, like a snowblower and a lawnmower. So I think you need storage. Storage is really important when you're in a tiny.
Yeah. No, it's definitely important. Um, and you own your land, correct?
Yeah, we own the land. So I know that in the tiny home community, it can get difficult to find spaces for it, but we do own the land.
And is Golden friendly to tiny houses?
How can I be politically correct about this? The town of Golden is resistant to tiny homes.
Yeah.
I'm right on the boundary of the town of Golden. So I am fortunate in that way because we're right across the road to the boundary.
Okay, so you're not technically in Golden.
That's right.
Got it.
So we've actually been approached by several people, like, would you put a tiny, I get a lot of, could I put my tent up there? And it's, and I'm not against it. This is my first year being here and I want to understand more of the rules and regulations. So
yeah, totally. I'm kind of in a similar situation. I'm not living in my tiny anymore, but it is actually an Airbnb now on somebody's property that I'm renting, and it's very much under the radar. So like my biggest fear is like having to move it, because I've got all these, bookings out for several months. It would be a nightmare. But
yeah, that's scary. That's risky, but it is what it is. You have to trust the process. It always works out, right?
Exactly. You got to trust the process. So when you bought your tiny house, was it, did you buy it new, kind of like custom for you, or was it a used house? Or can you talk about like the process that you went through buying the house?
Yeah, so I knew I wanted a tiny house. A lot of people were like, why don't you go with a modular home or do this or this? And I was like, no, I love the idea of a tiny home. I love the idea of being able to move it. I love the sense of freedom that it offers. And I did a little bit of research at builders. So I unfortunately do not have the skills to build a house. It's on my bucket list.
Yep.
But I bought it custom to me. And it was important that each kid had its own room. It was really important when I was going through the building process that they each had their own space, because I did purchase it knowing that at some point I would be out here more and more. And I knew that I wanted them, to be able to put their Legos or whatever they want in their own space. So I bought it new, built it custom. I got to choose all the things inside. Again, looking back, I would have changed a few things. Silly questions like I assumed it would come with blinds. It didn't. Just really ridiculous, the weird things. When I first saw the compostable toilet, I was like, oh, what do I do with that?
Yep. And what kind of compost toilet is it? And have you warmed to it?
I'm still resisting the composting toilet.
Okay.
Our whole family loves going to a hotel and to get away to flush a toilet, which makes I don't find it. It was a little bit of a shock at first, just coming from the suburban life and where everything is easy. Like you get flushing water and running water and all those things. It's a separate toilet, and apparently it's like the nicest compostable toilet you could ever have. And I do appreciate it because we would go through a lot more water if we had a flushing toilet. But it's different, right?
Yep. It's definitely different. And also, not only would you have to have water, but you'd have to have a place for it to go.
That's right. Yeah. It's a big deal. I can't believe how often I talk about toilets now, but it's a big deal to have a flushing toilet. And, you have to put the septic and you have to have flushing water or running water, and the pipes have to be pretty deep into the ground. And that just wasn't something that I was going to do at the time.
Yeah. I mean, I think people should do whatever they're comfortable with, but I'm a big proponent of compost toilets myself, just for the water savings and just how well they fit into a tiny house. So hopefully over time you'll grow to love it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm adjusting. I am adjusting.
Yeah.
I guess too, with having kids are very, very messy.
Yep.
And I feel like I'm constantly cleaning that toilet.
Yep. I feel like there's got to be. It's like potty training all over again.
You
Teaching
just
them how
nailed
to
it.
use the compost toilet. Yeah.
You nailed it. It's like the kids looked at it and they said, "What do I do?" And then we've had guests come over with little
Yep.
kids and they're
Yep.
like, "I don't know how to use this toilet." So it is. It's
Yeah.
like potty training all over again, and it's
Yeah.
super fun.
Yeah. So, I mean, like in my house, I actually have the like most basic, simple version of a compost toilet, which is just the sawdust and
Yep.
bucket. And I think what I really appreciate about it is that it's a little less complicated to use. Like, there aren't two holes in the toilet. There's just one, you open the lid, you do what you need to do, and you pour in some sawdust.
Yeah.
But they do require much more frequent emptying than the separate.
So we actually have another tiny on the property.
Okay.
And it's a little,
Okay.
yeah, it's a log tiny, and that is Airbnb'd. And
Okay.
it's really small and it's entirely off grid. And we have a sawdust toilet. And I agree with you. Like I almost prefer how that process works. It's just you go, you empty it. Like it's not it's not surprising. It's not relearning things. And we have an abundance of sawdust because of all the trees on the property. So it makes sense. So I do appreciate that toilet. Again, you see toilets in a different way when you've experienced multiple types.
Now, are you like grinding your own sawdust for that toilet, or how are you getting the sawdust?
No, so we had a few projects on the property that obviously, kick out sawdust. But I'm trying to think of the garbage place, the dump has piles of sawdust that you can just go and get. And there's also a mill down the street and he has sawdust. So there seems to be, because where we live, there's always an abundance. And when we start falling more trees, we will ask the guy who's milling it to keep the sawdust for us. So.
Yep. There was something that you talked about earlier that I kind of want to revisit, which is like when you were searching or when you were in the process of buying your tiny house, that other people were saying, okay, why not this? Why not that? And you wanted a tiny house. I would imagine that, a 41-foot tiny house is pretty comparable in price to like a small single family home in some locations. And I'm curious, why, what was it about tiny houses that made you want to go that route?
Yeah, there was a few reasons in terms of price, and the price of this tiny is, I'll just, in Canadian dollars, it was about $160,000. And that for a lot of people, when I got the quotes, they were like, wow, that's a lot of money. Why don't you just build a house? Or why don't you do it this way?
Right.
I don't like being told what to do. So that's probably a piece of it.
Okay.
The deciding factors were, I live in a mountain town and I looked at getting a modular home. I did the research and a lot of them couldn't go under the highway. We have paths for the animals in the provincial parks.
Okay.
So it would have been difficult to get one here. I didn't want to put a foundation down because I wanted to be able to move the house. I wanted to be able to have a truck and move the house if I wanted to.
Yeah.
I also just loved the idea of having less space because modular homes are a different size. And I liked having less space. I wanted my life to be very, very simple and free. And it felt like with a modular home or a different style of home, I wasn't achieving that freedom that I was craving. So could I have spent the money on something else? Probably. But I just love this house. And I think that it was the best decision for me. And I just love it.
Nice. Well, one thing that you kind of mentioned when we were arranging the interview is that you love to talk about how tiny living doesn't feel tiny when you're being really intentional about everything that you're doing. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I never feel like this house is small. I don't. I never walk in here and think, holy Hannah, like I don't have enough room. And I work from home. I do everything from home. Like I'm here pretty much 24 hours a day. And we
Yeah.
have the two dogs and the two kids. And I just find that when I go somewhere and I see something that I would have purchased before, I now stop myself and think, do I need that? Could I
Mm-hmm.
borrow it? Could I rent it? Will it have a home inside my home? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no, I don't need it. So
Yeah.
everything in here, I kind of think like everything in this space is part of my family, like everything. And we're just really intentional with the things we bring in here, the food we bring in here, even the people we bring in here. and and I love that. That's so different from before. I had over 3,000 square feet before. I had a room for my studio. I had a room for the kids to play, and everybody was so separate. Like I wouldn't see my partner, I wouldn't see my kids, I wouldn't be able to find the dogs, which sounds crazy, but it's true. And I filled
Mm-hmm.
every square inch of that house.
Yep.
Like, oh, I need something there. I need something there. Let's put this on the walls. It's like, no, why am I doing that? And it wasn't intentional. It was just because I think I felt I like deserved to fill the space because I had it.
Mm. Yeah, you almost see the space and you're like, well, I need to put something there. It's empty.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that kind of falls into sort of things that are shifting for me as I live more tiny. I
Mm-hmm.
don't need to fill spaces. And if I am filling them, is it coming from a place of fear or lack? Or is it coming from a place of love?
Yeah. And your kids are old enough that I'm sure they remember life before living tiny. Was the transition difficult for them?
You know what? I have to be really honest with you. Yes, it has been difficult for them. When I got the tiny at first, they were little.
Mm-hmm.
It was 2.5 years ago. And
Mm-hmm.
they thought it was super cute. They were like
Yeah.
excited about the little spaces, climbing into the loft, going up the stairs. And now, unfortunately or fortunately, they are making some comments. And as a parent, it just kind of pulls you apart, your heart. But,
Yeah.
my daughter is 11 and she does want to have people over. And my
Mm-hmm.
son, created, which I think is cool, but he doesn't. He created in his loft a separate room, like out of cardboard box, and he put a little window in it. And he's being really
Uh-huh.
creative. But he's like, Mom, I want to get changed in here and not have everybody see me. So I know. And, you spend so much time as a parent trying to teach your kids that, stuff and space doesn't matter. And then their little voices are telling me that they want stuff and space right now. So we're working through some parenting things.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that because it's I know there are a lot of parents who are considering living tiny, and there's probably an equal number or a much greater number of kind of YouTube hecklers and critics and people saying, "Oh, you shouldn't do that. Like kids need this or kids need that." Um, so it's got to be hard to both kind of follow your instinct on the way you want to live, but also hearing, sometimes hearing your kids complain about it, having to kind of almost stay strong.
Yeah, and the internet can be a really wild and crazy and mean space, but I don't
Yeah,
really pay attention to it too much. It's the kids.
that's
So
good.
I'm trying to remind them that they have an abundance of space, but they're not using it, right? They have
Mm-hmm.
all this land. Get outside, go
All the
play.
outdoors. Yeah.
The entire, it's a playground, and we have a zip line, and we've got a gazebo with outdoor space to color and things like that. But
Yeah.
I don't think, because I do kind of get asked that question, oh shoot, like what about your kids? And I'm like, well, what about your kids? So
Do you think that at some point they'll want to, or you'll encourage them to build their own tiny space, like their own tiny room that's detached from the main house?
Yeah, so let me tell you a story. Before my daughter's 11th birthday, she said, "Mom, I'd like to ask you something for my birthday. I'd like to build a house." And I looked at her like, what 11-year-old gets a house for their birthday? And that was my initial reaction. But, I don't think I'm not going to let her build a house, because I also reminded her with a house comes cleaning, toilet emptying, mice, things of nature. What happens if a bear comes up to your door? But I do think that this next summer, we're going to build like a tree house with 2 different areas for them and have them participate in that process. So yes and no. I don't want them to have their own separate unit.
Okay.
But I do think their own kind of place to go and read and bring friends might be really valuable in the next year or 2.
Yeah. Yeah, I've read about that being really awesome, especially as kids kind of enter teenage years and want to kind of differentiate and have their own space.
Yeah. It's going to be important for sure.
Yeah. So you also work from home, which I like. My tiny house was kind of designed for 1 to 2, but I don't think I'd be able to work from there. I can't work from there if my wife is home. She's a nurse practitioner, so she works out of the house. But like during the pandemic, she was actually doing grad school online, and we were both home all the time. And I was like, I can't get anything done. So how do you get anything done?
So since we moved here, and it's, my partner has been home full time with me, which was difficult. Love them, love spending time together, love having lunch. But when you're on a call or you're in a meeting, you're like, get out of the house. You go do your thing. Let me do my thing. Yeah. I've been working from home for the last 8 years. So I think my level of time blocking and productivity is pretty good by now. And because the tiny is a tiny, I don't really get distracted by different things in here like I would in a bigger home. So I'm on my kitchen counter right now. I'll move to the sofa in another hour. I might go to the bedroom for the last bit of the day. And I go outside a ton when it's nice out. I work outside in the gazebo almost every day when it's nice. So just get it done. And I do go to town, to grab a coffee, just to see human beings sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I that was, for me, it was a major loss in the pandemic, was like going to the coffee shop to work.
Yeah.
Because I really do like that location change. But I'm going to take that as a tip to just like move around the house to different places, the kitchen counter. Like I have this office now, this tiny little room that it's partially my office and partially where we store like all of our stuff. So I feel like almost guilty when I don't use it as my office, because it's like we live in a pretty small place. So it's like I feel like I should be using the office, but sometimes you got to move around.
Yeah, when I had an office in my last home, and I never used it because it felt like I had to be in there. And again, I think that this is why I was drawn to the tiny home space. It's like freedom. It's just the freedom that it gives you in your mind and for your work. Yeah. My office was like, okay, go in the office, close the door, work. I'm like, I don't like that. I want to be open.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, do you kick your family out when you have a call, or like, is it just like a learning curve and just a process every time?
It's kind of funny because I recently went through a divorce, and when I was in my previous marriage, I couldn't take calls, even in our big home in the office. I didn't want other people to hear me. So it was weird. And now in this tiny home, I don't kick them out. I'm like, mommy's on a call, and you guys have to be quiet for a little bit. And they do and they adjust. The dogs are the problem. They start barking while I'm working and I'm like, stop barking, stop talking. So no, I don't kick them out.
Yep.
Sometimes
Yep.
if I ever want to kick them out, I kick myself out and I will go to town. So I kick myself out of my own space.
Got it. And so you go to town, you kind of remove yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Because I also feel like that's just, if I want to kick them out, it's mostly me, right? It's like I'm the problem.
Yeah.
I'm working from home.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. You're also, it's kind of like you're doing the work that should take precedence over what everyone else is doing. But
well, that is the other side of that. Sometimes,
yeah.
But here, when I start getting angry about that, because again, just so honest with everybody, I do sometimes get angry when I'm sitting here and I'm working and everybody's doing things. I'm like, what's going on? I can't concentrate. But then I'm like, okay, but I can remove myself from the situation. This is their zone. But during the pandemic, that was pretty wild because you're also homeschooling and trying to work and trying to create an income.
Yeah.
And trying to do all the things. And basically nothing happened. None of those things happened.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
And can you tell us about your business? Like what it is that you do when you're working from home?
Yeah. So pre-pandemic, I owned a marketing company where I supported primarily women in business, small businesses who were just starting out. And then during the pandemic, a lot of women stayed home, stopped opening businesses. It was, we stayed home, homeschooled, all those things. And then I had to pivot during the pandemic because I realized, wrong niche.
Yeah.
And so then now I work with larger companies all over.
Okay.
I still support small startups and authors and, a lot of a variety of people, but we come up with their marketing strategies from start to growth. And that involves, their sales processes, their Pinterest accounts, their blogs. So a lot of really fun things. And I love doing it. I have been doing it for 8 years. I just had to pivot during the pandemic, but I sit here on calls. I come up with strategies and our team implements the strategies. So we have, remote people and it's very hybrid and I love it.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. And it's in a way you've created a business that can be done completely remotely and keeps you kind of in that home space where you want to kind of stay and be intentional.
Yeah, I love it because, there's so many positives about being in the tiny and having the business that I've, created and worked at because, I am here in the beautiful space that I had created and I do get to also leave because in terms of finances, this is a lot less expensive than my previous life. So, a few weeks ago we went to Dominican and then we went to Prince Edward Island and I was able to work and leave the tiny and not worry about the money and the maintenance because it's not a large space.
Right. Yeah. And that's like, I think that's the way you're doing it is the way to do it, which is that I don't personally think that a tiny house on wheels is like a great travel accessory. Like it's an awesome way to live a cool lifestyle that's inexpensive so that you can travel, so you can leave the tiny house. I'm particular to bicycle touring and going on kiteboarding vacations, but it's like, I don't want to take my tiny house.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear you say that because a lot of people kind of made that assumption that I was going to like pack up the tiny and travel in it. And then, the other day, one of my friends who lives in a different town said, you should come here and spend some time. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, we'll get a hotel for a few days. And she's like, what? Why would you do that? And I said, well, because for us, it's also now a little bit of an adventure to leave the tiny. Like, to get the things that we don't have in the tiny house, like a TV and a flushing toilet, it's just
Not
it's a
not to
yeah.
mention that it would probably cost a small fortune to move a 41-foot triple axle gooseneck tiny house.
Honestly, it's yeah, exactly. You can't move this easily. Plus, it's not. I mean, how would the washer and dryer, if you tow it across, to go to your next destination, or you'd have to like lock everything in. This particular tiny is not built to travel, and you'd have to spend a lot of hours to get it to. Even if we have to move it on the property, it would be quite a job.
Yeah. Well, I've really appreciated talking with you. I have a couple kind of closing questions. The first is just, if you could give yourself advice, if you could go back in time with the knowledge that you have now, what kind of advice would you impart to your previous self?
Do it earlier. Do it when you first started to think about it. Just dive in. It's 100% worth it.
Nice. And then one thing that I like to ask all my guests is just what are 2 or 3 resources that have helped you along the way that you'd like to share?
One of the biggest resources is there was a home builder out of Lethbridge, Alberta, who is not my home builder. And, following her on social media and watching what she was doing and watching what she was creating was a huge resource. She got on calls with me, and then listening to podcasts about tiny home living, and the real ones, not the Netflix version. That's not how it is. That's another really good resource. Listen to people who've done it. Like that's when I started listening to people who did it, I was like, okay, I can do that too.
Yeah.
And then sort of the last one is, don't listen to people who have not done it or who don't have a desire to do it, because they're not going to see it the way that you envision and that your dreams are. They're not going to see it like that.
Got it. Well, Megan Lockhart, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you. I had a really great time.
Thank you so much to Megan Lockhart for being a guest on the show today. You can find the show notes at thetinyhouse.net/232. That includes photos of Megan's beautiful tiny house and a complete transcript of today's episode. Also, don't forget to stick around after these credits for the bonus session with Megan, where she talks about how her builder forgot her furnace. But for now, I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast. All right, so I'm doing a little bonus with Megan because we were chatting after the recording, and you told me something that I really wanted to include in the episode about your heat. So would you mind kind of sharing that again?
Yeah, so when we were talking about building the home and what my heat sources are, one of the main heat sources was supposed to be a furnace. So we were going to have a furnace in the tiny, which is great. But the home builder forgot to put it in. Completely forgot. After a year, I didn't notice, and this is so ridiculous, but I thought when I was turning on the heat, I was turning on the furnace, but I was actually turning on the electric heat, which makes me feel stupid. But my partner said, no, there's no furnace in this house. So the builder didn't say anything. And then when I contacted them, they were like, oh, you should have gone through the checklist in more depth. So
they kind of blamed you for them not putting in something that was supposed to be in.
Yeah, they did.
That's really crappy.
It is really crappy. And as a person who's spending, and we talked about the price of the home, whether it's that price or any price, you put a lot of trust into your home builder, right? You do. You're like, you're building my home. Here's what I want. I'm paying for these things. I shouldn't have to go through and check every little thing on the sheet, which this was a pretty big piece of the home. To put a furnace in now would almost be impossible. They'd have to rip out the entire house to find a place to put the furnace, to put the ducts and all that stuff. So it's a pretty big deal. And I think, again, as a this was my first home that I built.
Yeah.
And I just put a lot of trust into the people that I'm hiring.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds like, unfortunately, that's not the worst thing that I've ever heard about a build gone wrong. And the fact that your builder did offer you some money, even though it doesn't solve the problem and it's not enough to rectify the situation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the usual builder response is just kind of ghosting clients, which is bad.
Yeah, I think what comes up is they just want you to not mention it. It's like maybe they won't notice, maybe they won't look for it. And I had a lot of back and forth emails with the builder, and their solution was always, we'll send you a little bit of money. We'll send you a little bit of money. And for me, it was like, this isn't really about the money. It's about the process. And I've thought about it a lot. And I was like, could they improve their process? Could they actually make sure that these things aren't being missed? Because again, it's trust. And when you're hiring a pretty large home builder, you think, well, they've got their poop in a group. Nothing's going to be missed. and things get missed. I didn't mention this, but there were a lot of other little things that got missed, and not to dive into like a pool of negativity, but the backsplash was missed. Other things were missed, and it was just, I don't want to look for those things. It's just delivered. You think you get what you pay for, right?
Right. Well, that's the ultimate buyer beware. And if anybody listening has been listening to the show for any amount of time, it's definitely a theme that we've touched on a lot, which is just if you're working with a builder, getting a contract, paying them in phases, based on deliverables, that kind of stuff. But, this kind of adds another one to the list, which is just like, you really have to go through and make sure that they've done what they agreed to in the contract. And it's mind-boggling to think that they could miss something as big as putting in an entire system that you agreed on, like the furnace.
Yeah, and it did blow my mind, because it took a year for me to even notice, but also for them not to just respond with a quick, oh, we'll just send you some money. It's interesting to me, because it's like, why, when you go to someone's website, are none of these like reviews aren't, I just want more honesty in the tiny space, in the tiny home space, like real, honest, vulnerable, here's what happens, because it's important.
Yep. It is important. Well, Megan, thank you for kind of doing this little bonus session. I appreciate your honesty throughout the interview, and especially with sharing this one.
Thank you.